Yeah, all right. So my name is Aaron Van Wirdum. I work for Bitcoin Magazine. I'll let the panelists introduce themselves. Let's go from right to
Okay.
left. Tadge.
Hi, I'm Tadge Dryja. I've been working on Lightning since before it started, I guess, or wrote the Lightning Network white paper with Joseph Poon back in 2015, and have been working on Bitcoin stuff at MIT, and now I'm at Lightspark doing Lightning stuff. So, hi.
I'm John Carvalho once again from Synonym. Been working on Lightning since it was actually on mainnet, but not protocol.
I'm Sam Wouters. I work at River. I make content, do research. So yeah, super happy to be here.
I'm Justin Litchfield. I'm at Voltage. We run lots of Lightning nodes. I've been working on it since quite a while, but they're at Voltage for almost 2 years, doing that full time. It's a lot of fun.
All right. So yeah, Lightning, which obviously is kind of a big topic. There's entire conferences about Lightning. We're gonna distill all of that in 30 minutes. So I wrote down some topics. I'm just gonna throw them in there, and you guys give your opinion. That's sort of the idea of a panel. So let's start with Lightning is kind of going through a thorough disillusionment, I think, is what it's called. Like people are kind of at least claiming that it's not working as well as sort of originally promised, or no one's using it, or not using it in the intended ways. What's your thoughts about that? How successful is Lightning right now? How's it doing so far? Who wants to go first?
I mean, it's very subjective. Depends on your measure, right? Like the overall node growth and liquidity growth has gone up, but it's not like hugely significant. So you could be disappointed in that if you really wanted, but why? I don't know. And I have noticed like a little bit, and it's not as bad lately, but a little bit of a Lightning sucks theme, like you're saying, and people wanting to focus on its shortcomings. But those shortcomings were always there. It's just maybe now we can see them and talk about them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it works a lot better than it, not in terms of like nodes or things, but just in terms of the actual software and payments getting through and things not crashing. It's certainly not at the level like that Bitcoin Core is, but it works a lot better than it did 2 or 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, yeah, like it's definitely a more complex thing. There's a lot of gears and a little bit of a Rube Goldberg thing going on there, but yeah, it's way better than it was. So I don't know, that's the right direction anyway. But yeah, it hasn't taken over the world yet. So maybe we have to wait a little longer.
Yeah, I find it's kind of funny when people expect it to take over the world, because lots of people have, like even in Bitcoin, have never really used Lightning or interacted with it. For a large part of Bitcoiners, all they know is their exchange. That's where they interact with Bitcoin, and lots of exchanges has never integrated Lightning yet. So how are these people, like, they're not as likely to go ahead and discover Lightning and go play around with it unless they take the initiative. So why would sort of Lightning decouple from Bitcoin adoption and do far better than Bitcoin adoption has for the past few years when it's gone down? That to me just doesn't make a lot of sense. So people like to be very critical, and in a way Bitcoiners are their own worst enemy there. Like we're super critical of Bitcoin, it's crazy. But really, like, why would Lightning be doing so much better than Bitcoin has been recently? That's part that I don't really get, and why I think, like, if I look at the data, to me it looks really interesting and promising, and I'll be presenting about it tomorrow a bit, some of my findings on like how many people are using Lightning now, etc. And from my perspective, it's like I'm actually, like, not being an engineer who's working on Lightning myself, I am proud of what people have built and how much adoption there is even after these years. So.
Yeah, I would concur with most of that. I think that I mean, we can see in River, I know you guys can see, payment volumes are up, like it's growing. The network itself is kind of weird. Like we had this, a lot of narrative, like everybody was going to get rich running routing nodes for a long time, which I think was like fairly problematic. And that's calmed down a lot, thank God. But, it's hard to use. Your Bitcoin's at risk. But it's easier to use than it's ever been. It works better than it's ever been. It's the best time to build on Lightning there's ever been. And tomorrow's going to be better, right? Like, there's so many cool things in flight. So I'm super bullish about it, even though, the narrative can be a little bit down, but we're also at 26K Bitcoin or something. It feels bad.
I mean, is there any sort of foundation for that narrative? Are you seeing growth slowing down at least? Like how has it developed over the years?
I think it's kind of noisy to be able to say, you
What's
know.
that?
I think it's a little too noisy to say. I think the foundation of this is that Lightning was oversold in the first year. Partly my fault. I contributed to it.
Sorry, I didn't get it. Who?
I said that was partly my fault too. I contributed
right.
to that. Like there was the reckless meme, and I said no, be reckless, and Lightning's ready now, and everybody, like he said, like people thinking people would get rich or something like this. Like yeah, when you set up a whole technology to like make promises and that it's gonna like make Bitcoin pump, if it doesn't pump and there's not a million people using it, then you are disappointing.
Yeah. Well, so to make the critique or the common critique a bit more specific. Many people will say, yeah, people are kind of using Lightning, but everyone's using custodial solutions. So are they really using Lightning? Is there any truth to this argument? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of the same as Bitcoin, where like I don't use any custodial solution, you know, but yes, it's a lot harder. You know, custodial's easy. You go to a website, it works, or you have some little like, you know, basically web page kind of app and it works. But it's certainly possible to be non-custodial, and it's better and easier than it has been. But yeah, it's the same as in Bitcoin. I don't know if like the ratio of like, okay, what proportion of Bitcoin users are just using an exchange and custodial versus Lightning users. There is this sort of idea of like people, okay, I'm going to buy a Raspberry Pi and run a Bitcoin node and a Lightning node, and yeah, I'm going to route and I'm going to make money with my Raspberry Pi and stuff and get a return on my Bitcoin. That part I've always been sort of like, oh boy, like I sort of was like, maybe we shouldn't have fees in the first version at all, because people are going to like, it's kind of going to be like mining, where everyone's like, oh, I'm going to make money this way and buy tons of mining equipment and mine in my basement. And like, I don't know, maybe some people made money, but generally no. Same with Lightning. Like, you know, there's way more supply of people who want to like buy a product and plug it in and then somehow make a return off of it than there is actual demand for like routing and stuff. So yeah, you're probably not going to make money of it, but it can be still useful. Like it does work for payments a lot. So.
Yeah, the idea that custodial, I mean, so we are very passionate, like we build non-custodial Lightning stuff. It boxes us in a huge way. We have so many product design meetings and stuff where it's like, yeah, we just can't. Like this is just right out because we're non-custodial. But there will always be way more custodial Lightning. There's going to be more custodial everything than non-custodial everything in like the whole future of humanity. Like we're people, we live in like these trusted systems. We will build the tools and we want people to use the tools that are the better tools, to be sure. But I don't have judgment against people that want to use custodial solutions, and I don't think we should. Like that's just the reality of people and markets and all of this. You can't fight it too hard.
Does everyone agree with that? Like people will just use custodial more often than non-custodial? Is that an accepted truth here?
So
on this
far, it's
panel?
what the data says. Like kind of regardless of what our opinion of it is, like there's like a certain amount of activity that we can tell on the blockchain itself. Like this is how many users there sort of likely are of the blockchain, and that means that everyone else interacting with Bitcoin is likely doing it in some kind of custodial way. So there's like, that is the reality in Bitcoin today, and it's logical that that translates to Lightning today. Doesn't mean we should, and like I said, we're our own worst critics, it doesn't mean we should accept it and like just accept that as a future and not try to improve things and allow more people to self-custody. But for a lot of people, Bitcoin's a really big leap. It's that taking that responsibility of their own money and their own actions in a way, and getting them started in a custodial way can make it far more accessible, get them at least excited about what the possibilities are, and then maybe, hopefully one day, they'll take the step further where they start taking their own responsibility. But without that option in between, without the custodial option, a lot of people will just look at it and be like, this is too intimidating for me. And that's just something that Bitcoiners might need to realize, is that not everyone is as believing in the technology as you are, or is immediately going to make that leap to self-custody. Some people just need to be held by the hand and gradually, step by step, build up their knowledge and start taking that responsibility.
I feel a lot differently about it. Not that that is wrong, so much as you have wallets and you have Bitcoin and you have accounts, and those are just not Bitcoin. And so you have to create this, separation between them. What was I going to say? Sorry. I forgot.
Yeah, I mean, I think there definitely are things, like obviously you want everyone to like compile their own full node and know what's, be really informed about what's going on and run their own full node. And like, yeah, that's what I do, but like I understand that it's not what everyone's going to do. But there's a lot of things that are helping make custodial stuff better, like Cashew and Fediment and things where they're like, okay, there are levels of custody here, and that can be okay, right? Like I have been a custodian for family members many times because they're like, you're at Thanksgiving and they're like, hey, can you get some Bitcoin for me from like an aunt or uncle? And you're like, yeah, okay. And they trust me. And like, that's sort of fine. And so, tools like Fediment and things like that can be great for that. And maybe then everyone, I don't know that the goal is everyone runs their own node on their own hardware that they understand and stuff. That is sort of my goal, but like I understand most people aren't going to do that. And so we can work on also solutions that like can be custodial, but like not in a bad way necessarily. Hopefully.
I was going to say the realistic side of what I meant was I see kind of two possible futures for Lightning. One, where we figure out a good user experience where people can run a node themselves just by installing an app, and that the LSP handles a lot of the abstracts a lot of the complexity. We figure that out and it goes well, and Lightning actually is useful, and it's used in retail, et cetera. Or we fail at that for various reasons. There's a lot of reasons we might, just complexity to abstract them. Or we end up in a situation where Lightning is used mostly for business-to-business settlement, where most people are just using Lightning as accounts, and the actual Lightning that's happening is between businesses to remove credit terms. That's always going to be a use case, and you're always going to be able to make a network out of that. That will be like the minimum success of Lightning, I think.
What right now are the most pressing or important improvements that can be made to Lightning to make non-custodial use of it more convenient?
I think
or Lightning or using Lightning in general.
I think for what I'm looking at is like offline receiving, async stuff, and then there's like groups working on that. Just because if you want to use a phone, phones are not online like all the time. Most of they're very intermittent, and the big thing is like you have to be online to receive. And so there's, work on that with like LSP protocols to make it so that you can still receive all offline. I think that's a big one.
There are different solutions to get there, is that right?
Yeah, I think the one that people are, I'm talking to people, I know some people at Spyro are working on it, where sort of LSPs message each other and hold HTLCs for longer durations in channels and sort of coordinate that moving the HTLC. That I think it, from on paper looks great, but like we don't have code to do that yet, but we're working on it.
Right. Does everyone agree this is the most important thing?
Probably. I mean, that's why.
I think we all agree on our wish list.
It was
probably.
a question for the rest of the panel, Tadge.
Our wish list is async, splicing, things like that. It's like not a very long list, but things we know are coming that we can't wait for.
Yeah, I think so too. And the solution to that maybe like the eCash stuff, maybe Cashew or Fediment just solves the async payment thing, because we actually don't need async payments all of a sudden. I don't know. I think between the federated eCash stuff, which is so cool, and when dollars are on Lightning, Taro or RGB or whichever one of those wins, like we'll have dollars on Lightning soon, and I think that changes so much of the rest of the landscape that it's really hard to sit here and complain or whatever. Like that will get people to actually use it in a much bigger way than I think a lot of like these very tiny details that we're looking at or arguing about right now. Like that doesn't matter really.
I think there's zero chance Taro succeeds. It's too much piled on complexity. Like it'll take forever for us to get Lightning right, forever to get Taro right, to put those things together, and then that there are practical ways to accomplish the same goal that require less complexity. I don't think it'll ever really be a thing. I think you can pay to make it a thing for a while if you're well-funded, but I don't think it's going to work.
What about on-chain changes? So a lot of Lightning developers, I think, like this idea of L2. This would require an on-chain, a base chain, a protocol layer change for Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, any pre-vote, yeah.
Yeah. Tadge?
So I mean, I guess it's L2, but now I know one guy, InstaGibbs or whatever, he's working on it and now calls it LN symmetry and I understand.
Okay, wait, maybe not everyone knows what this is, so maybe this is a good thing
LN
to
symmetry, Greg Sanders is working on it. I think he just joined Spiral. And the main problem, I guess, that they're trying to solve is the sort of justice transaction, the punishment mechanism in Lightning, where if you try to go back to an old state, your counterparty can take all the money in the channel. And like, obviously I'm biased because like I came up with that part and I think it's kind of fun. And it felt very like Bitcoin to me. It's like, well, if you do something wrong, like you lose all your money. And it's very sort of pre-Hammurabi code version of justice, where it's not eye for an eye. It's like you just do everything. But yeah, that is problematic in some cases. It almost never happens intentionally. So if you actually look on chain, you're like, okay, when do these transactions happen? It's all bugs. It's never like someone trying to do, or backups and restores and stuff. And so, yeah, like in a real world scenario where there's bugs and stuff, this is an issue. I think maybe someday it won't be, but like the idea of LN symmetry or L2 is you don't take all the money if something goes wrong. You publish the correct state. Right, so if someone says, oh, I have all the money, I have this much money in the channel, instead you publish, no, here's the correct amount that we're supposed to have. And that actually does really simplify a lot of the software, because you only need to keep track of the correct thing, not all the old things in order to recover from it. That does need L1, consensus changes. I think it'd be cool if some of those changes did happen, but it's still an open question. There's still like pros and cons of these things. So it's not something that's going to happen tomorrow, but it's really great that people are working on the software saying, if we had this change, how would this stuff work? Is it really worth it? What does the complexity look like?
Yeah, you mentioned though that you prefer justice transactions. So why do you prefer that? Just because you're biased, or is there actually a reason for it?
I do think depends on so I think in a situation where people are friendly, right? Because in Lightning, it's not really battle hardened to the extent that Bitcoin is. Like in Bitcoin, you have people using like darknet markets and like ransomware, where like the people who are paying each other really hate each other and would attack each other if they ever saw each other in real life. That's not really what you're seeing in Lightning right now, right? In Lightning, you have channels with people, and a lot of it is things that like could be your friends, or I have a channel with my exchange and I'm trusting for this thing anyway or something. So in many cases when these justice transactions happen, if something goes wrong, you can call up the other side and say, hey, I must have screwed up my software because your side took all the money, and yeah, I must have done something wrong. Could I have it back? And then they give it back, right? Like it's versus if you're in a really adversarial scenario, you do want that thing where like, so Lightning is not yet in this setup where you can really have a channel with someone who like hates you. But maybe we can get there. Versus something like L2, you do sort of have this option to cheat, and then if you get caught cheating, nothing really bad happens, right? You just fix the problem. And so I think they're both useful in different scenarios. I think Lightning is useful in a long-term scenario where you're actually like really adversarial. So I think it's good to have both, and that's why I think Greg is also calling it like LN symmetry. These are variants of Lightning that we can all use.
So it sounds almost like an American call option to cheat.
Kind of. Yeah.
Is that a valid argument against L2?
No, I mean, I think it's great to have more options, and I don't think it actually matters as much. The complexity is the different part that really matters. Like if it's simpler to implement, then that kind of outweighs these sort of game theory things, because in practice, like the game theory stuff doesn't really come up much, but the complexity is just like, look through some of the code where there's like 15 levels of indentation. You're just like, oh man, we need to simplify this. This can't, I don't know, like that's what I worry about. Like, can this really take off and get working really well if it's too complex? And Lightning started as like kind of complex, and then over the years it's gotten really complex. And so like if this is the way to simplify things and make the state machines easier, to me, that's like definitely worth it.
I would say I have two separate decisions within that, which is I just don't support softworks as a default mode. And so if APO appears, I will use it, because we do have problems with backups, multi-device. Like there's a lot of issues that are caused by the state management. So I would use it, but I would not like advocate to make a soft fork so I could do that.
All right. So, but you do think it would improve Lightning?
I think it would make my job easier. I don't know if that would improve Lightning.
All right. Wait, so it would improve Lightning?
Because we
therefore
know
it
what
would
to do
improve
to fix
Bitcoin,
the
but
problem.
you're still against it.
Sorry, we know what we do to fix the problem with the situation we have. Like we know the work that needs to be done. We can handle it. But it is complexity, and we do have to make that work, and then everybody has to do it in a compatible way. So it's a lot to coordinate.
Right. Any other thoughts on L2? desirable, undesirable?
Kind of to kind of go back to Giacomo's talk, like on that, I'm like, it's too uncertain that like I'll just take the dummy position on that one, where like it's not necessarily, I haven't dedicated the time, and like there's so much uncertainty, I don't know if it's worth it. You know, we're just trying to ship stuff, to be honest. And coming back to like John's talk, where it's like these unknown dependencies, like you can't build on them. So like, sure, like maybe we can opine on it about beers, and I guess that's what this is. But for me, like we're just shipping software, and like it's going to be cool to see whatever the future holds, but I don't have much control.
All right. By the way, so there's no clock here. Stefan, are you gonna tell us? No one's gonna tell us. I don't know what time we started. I don't even know how long this panel is supposed to be.
I don't know
30
what time
minutes,
zone
I think.
we're in. Like, yeah, what time
All
is
right,
it?
well, at some point, I think probably someone get us off stage. John, you mentioned compatibility just now. So in the context of L2, that would introduce a potential incompatibility between wallets, right? That would be one of the problems.
That's not what I mentioned, but you're right. All I meant was that coordinating compatibility across many implementations doesn't always go so well, and that's what makes Lightning so fragile.
Right.
Its complexity.
Well, so that was going to be my question.
But I
That's
hadn't
the
thought about
question I was
that.
working
Yeah,
towards.
that's a
So
good
how
question.
big of an issue is that right now?
I don't know. I hadn't thought about that
Incompatibilities.
before. That you'll have two versions now. This is also an issue with like going from HTLC to PTLC. Like you have these kind of two networks essentially. I don't know.
Yeah. So for HTL, like if you know an L2 channel and then a regular Lightning channel, you can pass HTLCs between them fine. You don't even need to know that the other person's channel is using this L2 mechanism. So that, you know, it's not like PTLCs where PTLCs, like you can't jump a PTLC and turn it into an HTLC and back or something. You can't route end to end that way, but you could with L2, and you know, with LN symmetry and LN penalty, sort of, you can have channels and interoperable that way. But you know, yeah, you have to actually make the software to interoperate that way.
Yeah, like if my wallet uses the old backup method, now I have to support maybe two methods or only the new method, or convert people from the. There's stuff that needs to be handled.
Yeah, we saw that with even like the Bitcoin core stuff, and like the wallets took forever to adopt like Fetch32. Like you still see really old addresses from time to time. So that's gonna be like a huge complexity. And right now, even some of the implementations, you know, LND and Core Lightning are usually like super compatible, but we get RCs from time to time that it's like, nope, like half the channels just broke. And so adding any of that complexity is so hard, because this is a very, you know, it's a difficult problem.
Yeah, so I think you might have some data on how many transactions in general kind of actually go through and how many fail, right? So what are the stats of that these days?
I was actually just looking at that yesterday, I think. But it's, you know, it's only from our perspective, and from companies that have shared data with us that we can look at. So from our perspective, it's like, in general, 99% plus of payments succeed. So there's like 1% is there, and that will hover for month to month. This month, or sorry, August was only like 0.3% failed or so. So that's starting to look really interesting. But that's, you know, it's still a noteworthy number. Ideally, that number would be as close to 0% as possible. But like there's a variety of reasons there why payments fail, and I think like one of the ones I was mentioned earlier, like, you know, the receiver is offline, is a big issue there, where people try to send a payment through the network and they just can't really find the recipients as they're not online. That's still, as far as I can tell, the biggest reason why this is happening. And the second one is just like timing out, trying to find that person, and just X amount of time has passed and couldn't find them on the network. So those are the two biggest ones, not able to find a route and taking too long to find one. So like to your question earlier of like what needs to be improved for more people to want to use Lightning Custodial, I think that's part of it. And then the other part is sort of some of the risk that we've been talking about, where essentially your money is in a hot wallet. So how much do you want to risk to that? Like, yeah, to kind of come back to that, I think like those are some of the main issues to make people feel much more comfortable. Also, what you were mentioning with Tadge, with people not wanting to necessarily put their money on a node to like start trying to earn money if there's not that much to be made. It's also because there's a risk to it. If there was no risk at all, then everyone would happily do it, because any money that you make is, you know, a nice added benefit. But since there is risk, people are just more apprehensive, and that's also why we see that plateau in nodes and channels and capacity on the network. Because with the current state of Lightning tech, there's just, the people who want to run a node are likely already doing it. And until the technology improves and there's more adoption and there's more like higher on-chain fees, then it's probably likely that this is sort of the number of nodes that we're going to be having in the network for a while until those things improve. So I get the criticism that people have of Lightning, like, oh, it's kind of stalling. But then if you look at the underlying data of payments just continuously succeeding more often and more transactions happening on the network with the same capacity, same channels, actually less capacity because River reduced our capacity by like half, and people freaked out because people thought, there's like an issue with Lightning because the capacity dropped a lot. But we can just do more with less, essentially, as we're starting to find out with the network getting more and more efficient.
A couple of things on failed payments I need to inject is that there's a side of failed payments that we can't really measure, which is when they fail client side. And then there's also another aspect of why the network is probably improving is that the statistics of people using Lightning custodially are huge, right? It's like 80% plus.
It's actually less.
I don't know. I don't have the statistics from me. I looked at something that gave me an impression that there's just an obnoxious amount of people using Lightning.
Should be somewhere around like 60-ish% or so. But still, that's significant. Yeah.
That would improve transaction, reliability, right? Because now you're only communicating between professional nodes and not end user nodes. And that's one aspect. But yeah, also the aspect that we have many payment protocols within Lightning itself, and you can have client-side failures, and you can't measure those. Like when I try to scan, like Wallet of Satoshi defaults to Lightning address. And so if somebody tries to scan your default Lightning address, your default QR code in Wallet of Satoshi, and that wallet doesn't support Lightning address, it just fails,
All right. We have 5 more minutes, I just heard. Okay, zooming out. So we've discussed issues like compatibility, improving Lightning. Currently, there's a number of different teams working on this stuff, wallet developers, building implementations. How well is the cooperation going right now? Is there a lot of cooperation on setting standards, on making it compatible, or is it kind of a mess? What's your takes on that?
It's both. So in New York, in June, there was the sort of annual Lightning protocol meetup, and yeah, it's people from working on LDK, people working on LND, async, CLN, like a lot of the people, not everyone, but a lot of the people working on Lightning came, and it was really fun. Like there was discussion and argument, but in a fun way, where no one's really disagreeing on what to do. It's more like disagreeing on like, I don't want to code that. Like, you code that. Or like, if you code that, I don't want to have to code that on my implementation. That's too annoying. Or like, and then, or like an entire
Well, that sounds pretty important. That sounds more important than having fun, maybe.
Oh, yeah, no, but it's never a disagreement of like, I think this is a bad idea and we shouldn't do this. This is like, how about we talk about this later or next year? So everyone's sort of on the same page in what they want to achieve. And it's a lot of debate about like, okay, how do we get that? How do we simplify these things? Like, that sounds cool, but like, that seems impractical to program stuff. So I think at that meeting, some of the really interesting parts for privacy we were discussing were like, right now, there's a pretty strong link between your sort of L1, UTXOs and your channels, where you sort of point to your UTXO and say, that's my channel, and then build a network graph that way. And it doesn't need to be, right? Like that's the easiest way to do it. But you can definitely say, okay, I have a Bitcoin over here at a UTXO, and also I have a channel. And it's some other UTXO I'm not going to tell you about. You need some way to prevent someone from spamming the network and saying they have a trillion channels. But you don't actually need to couple between the sort of L1 and L2 stuff. And so a lot of the discussion was, okay, how do we update the messages so that you're proving you have something to prevent denial of service, but not actually, showing the linkage there. And it was kind of funny because a lot of people are like, oh, this is great, but like, yeah, I don't want to do this work right now. And then there are some people who are like, I think it's Chatham House Worlds, but you can probably figure out who, like, really pushing for it. It's like, no, we need to do this, right? Like, privacy is important, and like, yeah, I know it's a pain, and there's all these other things to work on, but if we don't discuss this now, and like, let's get a simple way to do this. And so, it is a process, and people argue and stuff, but I think we're all, trying to get the same thing, so it's cool.
So it sounds like the vision is more or less aligned. It's more about priorities.
Yeah, no one's. There's not much of like, oh, we really shouldn't do that, and then people like splitting off and making completely different protocols. It's like, and you see that in development now. Like I know Lightning Labs is really working on or Taproot channels with Musig too, and that's really hard. And I think a lot of the other implementations are sort of like, okay, you guys get that to work, and maybe we'll copy some of your code. And like CLN and Async are working on splicing, and other people are sort of watching them, and then maybe bringing in some of that code. So people are working on different areas to focus, and then it's a lot easier once someone else has gotten it to work to sort of look at how they did it and then implement it in your own.
Right.
I haven't been too close to Bolt or Blip development, but we did start the LSP spec group, and we kind of started it in a ragtag way. And then once there was demand for such a thing, like Matt Carvalho and C equals came along, and they basically said, your spec sucks. And we didn't put much work in it. I said, well, let's fix it. And it turned into a real spec group, and that's going well. So, yeah.
All right. Well, I hear that's our time. So thanks for being here, and thanks to the panelists.